August 23, 1945, Fort Chaffee, Arkansas. She believed snow meant execution. The train slowed before it stopped. Not with a jolt, not with urgency, but with the tired obedience of metal that had already carried too many people too far. She felt it through the floor before she heard it, the long sigh of brakes giving up their grip. Somewhere down the line, couplings clanged. Then nothing. Silence. She stood with her hands folded in front of her the way she had been taught to stand when waiting for orders. Around her, other women did the same. No one spoke. Breath clouded the air inside the car, thin and uneven. The walls were cold enough to sting through wool. When the door slid open, it did not scream. It scraped. Light poured in first, then air, sharp, clean, unforgiving. It cut into her lungs like glass. She blinked against it and saw white where she expected mud. Snow. It lay along the tracks in a flat, careless sheet already scarred by footprints. The rails disappeared beneath it, two dark lines swallowed by winter. For a moment, she could not understand what she was seeing. Snow did not belong here. Snow belonged to endings. She had been taught that. America kills prisoners in winter. The phrase did not sound like a rumor. It sounded like a rule. Something stated plainly without emotion the way one recited facts about geography or ammunition counts. Winter meant shortages. Shortages meant impatience. Impatience meant solutions. Final ones. She did not move when the order came. She did not need to understand the words. The tone was enough. A gesture of the hand. Down. Now. Boots appeared at the edge of the doorway. American boots. Thick leather, well-oiled, heavy. They stepped into the snow and left marks so clear it startled her. The tread was deep, confident. Not hurried, not angry. Just there. She waited for shouting, for the crack of a rifle butt against metal, for dogs, for anything that would make sense of what she had prepared herself for during the long days and longer nights of transport. Nothing came. Only the wind moving across open ground, lifting snow into the air in small spirals that dissolved as quickly as they formed. She thought of hunger first. That was always the beginning. In Germany, winter had taught everyone the same lesson. Potatoes frozen in cellars. Bread stretched thin. Soup watered down until it was more memory than meal. People learned to count calories without numbers, learned to feel the edge of weakness before it showed. She had been ready for that. She had been ready for days without food, for the slow narrowing of the body, for the way thoughts began to circle when energy ran out. She had been ready to watch others fade. She had been ready to become quiet. She had even prepared herself for the other possibility. The one no one said aloud, but everyone understood. A line. A command. Snow-stained dark where it shouldn't be. Instead, there was only waiting. The American soldiers did not rush them. They did not shout to move faster. They stood apart, rifles slung, but untouched their breath, visible their faces, unreadable. One of them adjusted his gloves. Another shifted his weight, the snow crunching underfoot with a sound too ordinary to belong to this moment. She stepped forward when it was her turn. The metal step down from the car was slick with frost. She felt it through the thin soles of her shoes and braced herself, expecting to be pushed, to be hurried. No one touched her. Her foot met the ground, and the cold traveled up her leg in a clean, immediate line. Snow packed around her ankle. She was standing on American soil, and nothing happened. Alive. The word came to her, uninvited, absurd in its simplicity. Alive. She stood there for a heartbeat longer than necessary, as if waiting for the correction to arrive. It did not. A soldier nodded once, not at her face, but somewhere near her shoulder, the way people acknowledged objects that had arrived where they were meant to be. She moved aside. Another woman stepped down. Then another. Behind the fence, the camp stretched outward in low wooden shapes, roofs dusted white smoke rising in thin columns that bent with the wind. The smell reached her a moment later. Not decay, not burning, something else. Wood, heat, She did not recognize it yet, but her body did. Europe was finished. She knew that, even if no one had said it out loud. Cities broken open. Roads crowded with people going nowhere. Winters that killed quietly without uniforms or flags. She had left that behind, crossing an ocean she had never seen toward a country she had only known as an enemy. She had expected cruelty, or efficiency, or indifference sharpened into something lethal. She had not expected this. No blows, no insults, no triumph in the eyes of the men holding the gates. Only procedure, and time, and the strange, unbearable absence of what she had prepared herself to endure. She took another step into the snow, then another, still alive. It was not in any lesson she had ever learned. She did not sleep that first night. Not because of noise. There was very little of it. No shouting. No engines, no sudden orders barked through the dark. That, more than anything else, kept her awake. Cruelty she understood, silence she did not. The barracks smelled of fresh-cut wood and cold iron. New construction unfinished in places. The walls had been assembled quickly, planks nailed with speed rather than care. When the wind rose, it found every weakness. It slipped through seams no one had bothered to seal, threading itself between boards, brushing across faces like fingers that did not belong to anyone. The sound came next. Wood contracting. A slow, uneven popping, as if the building itself were breathing badly. Each crack landed in the dark with a weight that made her flinch. She lay on her back staring at a ceiling she could barely see, counting the seconds between noises, trying to decide which one meant something. None of them did, or all of them did. She could not tell. Around her, other women shifted on their cots. Wool blankets rasped softly. Someone coughed and then stopped as if afraid the sound would be punished. Somewhere near the far wall, a woman whispered a prayer in a voice so low it was more thought than speech. She turned her head slightly, careful not to draw attention to herself. The cot beside hers creaked as the woman there leaned closer. "They wait until we're weak," the woman whispered in German. Her breath smelled faintly of stale bread. "That's how they do it." Another voice answered from the dark. "This is how they break people. Quiet first, then hunger." No one contradicted them. The logic made sense. It fit everything she had been taught. America was large. America was rich. America could afford patience. Why rush when winter did the work for you? Why waste bullets when cold and fear were cheaper? She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. It was heavy, thicker than she expected, but the cold still found its way in. It slid along her spine, settled in the hollow of her stomach, made her teeth ache. She listened. Boots passed outside, slow and regular. Not patrols in the way she knew them, not the sharp cadence of men trained to intimidate. These footsteps were measured almost casual. Someone paused near the door. Metal scraped softly as a latch was checked. Then the steps moved on. No one came in. That was the worst part. In Germany, order had always announced itself. Even cruelty arrived with ceremony. Commands, whistles, the bark of authority that made it clear where danger lived. Here there was no such clarity. The guards did not remind them they were prisoners. They did not need to. The cold did that instead. She closed her eyes and tried to picture home as it had been before everything narrowed. A kitchen with a real table. Steam rising from a pot. Her mother's hands moving without hurry. The memory came apart almost immediately. Too many winters had passed since then. Too many meals reduced to substitutes to waiting. She thought of Europe now, of cities she had passed through on trains with boarded windows. Roofs torn open. People moving slowly, wrapped in too many layers, their faces gray with the effort of surviving another season. She had seen what winter did to those who ran out of margin. She was certain it would find her here. Morning came without announcement. No bugle, no shouted reveille. Just a gradual thinning of the dark as light pushed through the narrow windows. Frost traced delicate patterns along the glass, elaborate and precise, as if someone had taken the time to decorate them. She sat up slowly, joints stiff, fingers numb. Her breath fogged the air in front of her face. Around her, others did the same, blinking, careful waiting for instructions that did not come. The door opened. She felt the tension ripple through the room, a collective tightening that did not need words. Heads lifted, spines straightened. This was it. An American soldier stepped inside. He did not shout. He did not raise his weapon. He glanced around the room, counted quickly, then spoke in a tone so ordinary it confused her. "Line up," he said, the words flattened by accent. He gestured toward the door. "Slow's fine. Slow." The word landed strangely. Not a threat, not a test. Just information. They moved as instructed, boots scuffing against the floor. No one pushed. No one fell. The soldier held the door open, his gloved hand steady against the wood. As each woman passed, he nodded once, not at their faces, but at the space in front of them, as if acknowledging a task completed correctly. Outside, the snow had hardened overnight. It crunched underfoot loud in the open air. She waited for punishment to arrive, with the sound for someone to take offense at the noise. Nothing happened. They were led across the yard in small groups. She noticed details she had not expected herself to care about. The way the guards' coats were mended at the elbows. The steam rising from a distant building. The smell again, wood smoke, stronger now, layered with something else she could not name. Her stomach twisted not with hunger yet, but with suspicion. At no point did anyone strike them. No one called them names. No one made a show of power. The absence pressed on her harder than blows ever had. It left too much room for imagination. She watched the guards closely, searching for signs. Anger, contempt, satisfaction. She found none of them. Their faces were tired, neutral, shaped by routine rather than hatred. One of them stamped his feet against the cold, muttering something she did not understand. Another pulled his cap lower over his ears. They looked like men enduring winter, not men enjoying control. That realization unsettled her more than fear ever had. She did not know, could not know, that the country holding her was stretched thin in ways she had never been told about. That across oceans, American soldiers were fighting in mud and jungle, in snow and heat, on two fronts that demanded everything. That farms and factories at home were missing hands, missing sons, missing fathers. She did not know that bodies mattered. That keeping prisoners alive was not mercy alone, but necessity. That labor shortages reached even places like this, even behind fences. All she knew was what she could see, and what she could not. By the time they were dismissed back to the barracks, the cold had settled deeper into her bones. Fear had not lifted. It had changed shape. It no longer shouted. It waited. That night, as the wind rose again and the wood resumed its slow, restless conversation, she understood something with terrible clarity. The danger was not that they would be hurt. The danger was that no one had told them why they were being spared. Fear had not passed. It had frozen right alongside the snow. Morning did not arrive gently. It announced itself with a smell. She noticed it before she opened her eyes, before she fully surfaced from the thin, restless sleep that had never quite become rest. It slipped into the barracks through the same cracks the cold had claimed the night before. Warm, where the wind had been sharp. Heavy, where everything else had been empty. Bread. The thought came unbidden, absurd enough that she almost rejected it. Bread had a smell she remembered too well, faintly sweet, faintly bitter, the promise of substance. In Germany, it had become thin, stretched, unreliable. Here the scent was fuller, confident. Another layer followed. Meat. Her stomach tightened hard enough to hurt. She sat up too quickly and had to steady herself, fingers digging into the blanket. Around her, other women were doing the same thing. Eyes wide, faces confused, the same question forming everywhere at once and nowhere aloud. This was not how execution smelled. She swung her legs over the side of the cot. The floor was still cold, but the air no longer felt hollow. The barracks no longer sounded like a place waiting to empty itself of people. Outside, she heard movement. Voices. Not raised, not urgent, ordinary. That made it worse. They lined up again just as they had been told the night before. No shouting came to rush them. No rifles were lifted to hurry their steps. The door opened and the smell grew stronger as they stepped outside, folding itself around them with a familiarity that made her dizzy. Coffee. She had not tasted real coffee in years. Ersatz yes roots, roasted grain, anything that could be boiled and endured. But this smell was unmistakable, bitter and rich and alive. The mess hall sat low and wide, its windows fogged from the heat inside. Smoke drifted from vents along the roof, not black, not desperate, but steady. As they approached her, fear twisted into something sharper, more dangerous. Suspicion. This was how they broke people, she told herself. By reminding them of what they no longer deserved. By offering something that could be taken away. Inside the room was loud in a way she had almost forgotten existed. Not shouting, but the layered sound of activity metal on metal voices overlapping chairs, scraping someone laughing too loudly at something unimportant. American soldiers stood in line on one side of the room, German prisoners on the other. There was no barrier between the food. She stopped walking without meaning to. The woman behind her nearly collided with her back. She forced herself forward again, eyes fixed ahead, afraid that if she looked too closely the illusion would collapse. The counter was long and plain. No decorations, no ceremony, just men moving with practiced efficiency. Trays slid forward, ladles dipped and rose. Steam curled upward, carrying with it heat that felt almost indecent against her frozen skin. A metal tray was placed into her hands. It was heavier than she expected. She looked down. Bread, thick slices, crust intact. Butter already melting into its surface. Meat, dark, glistening, resting in its own juices. Something pale and steaming beside it, grains swollen and soft. A spoon, solid, not bent, not ration thin. A glass, real glass. Clear, smooth, filled with something dark that sent up faint curls of steam. Her hands began to shake. She waited for the correction. For the laughter. For someone to tell her this was not meant for her. None of it came. The man behind the counter did not look at her face when he spoke. His eyes flicked to the tray, then back to the line already moving on. "Eat slow," he said. 2 words, flat, almost kind. She took a step forward because the line behind her moved. She carried the tray as if it might disappear if she shifted her grip. The room felt too warm, too bright. She chose a seat at random and sat down carefully, placing the tray in front of her as if setting something fragile onto a table. Around her, the room filled with the sounds of eating. Forks, knives, the low murmur of men who had done this 3 times a day for years without thinking about it. She did not touch the food. Her eyes moved instead, cataloging everything she saw. American soldiers eating the same meal, the same bread, the same meat. No separate line, no better portions. A guard leaned against the far wall, sipping from his glass, steam fogging his face. Another laughed, shaking his head at a joke she could not hear. This was not a performance. Her stomach cramped again, harder this time. Hunger rose up sharp and undeniable, cutting through fear with brutal efficiency. She reached for the bread, first fingers brushing the warm surface. It left a faint sheen of butter on her skin. She hesitated. If this was poison, she would know soon enough. She broke off a piece and brought it to her mouth. The first bite was almost painful. Texture, weight, the way it resisted slightly before yielding. She chewed slowly, just as she had been told, afraid that if she moved too quickly she would wake up. Nothing happened. No dizziness, no burning, no laughter from across the room. She swallowed. The room did not spin. She reached for the meat next. The smell alone made her throat tighten. She cut a small piece, careful, deliberate, and tasted it. Her breath caught. It was hot. Properly hot. Salt and fat and something deeper that she could not name but recognized instantly. Her eyes stung and she blinked hard, forcing herself to stay present. Across the table, another woman had stopped eating altogether, her face pale, one hand pressed to her mouth. She was not sick. She was overwhelmed, the body remembering what the mind had buried. She drank from the glass. Coffee, strong, real. The shock of it traveled straight through her chest, settling somewhere she had not felt in years. Around her the room continued as it had before, indifferent to the quiet catastrophe unfolding at the table. This was not charity. This was not cruelty. This was routine. She ate the rest of the meal slowly, exactly as instructed. With each bite, something inside her shifted, not all at once, not cleanly, but enough that the shape of the world felt less certain than it had the night before. She understood then dimly without words that this place operated by rules she did not know, that the people who fed her did not feel the need to explain themselves, that whatever this was, it was not a trick designed to make her suffer later. When she stood to return the tray, it was empty. Her hands no longer shook. She did not feel relief. She felt something far more dangerous. Confusion. She had eaten. And for the first time since stepping off the train, she knew with a certainty that unsettled her deeply. This was not a form of torture. The meal should have ended it. That was what she expected. A conclusion. A punishment delayed, perhaps, but inevitable. She had eaten, and nothing terrible had followed. Logic suggested relief should come next. It did not. Instead, the quiet unease deepened. The confusion followed her out of the mess hall and into the rhythm of the days that came after. It settled into her thoughts, persistent and unwelcome, asking the same question again and again in different forms, never allowing an answer. If this was cruelty, it was very badly designed. She began to notice things she had not allowed herself to see before. The camp ran like a machine that did not announce itself. Guards appeared when they were needed and disappeared when they were not. Orders were given once rarely repeated. The fences stood where fences were supposed to stand. Gates opened and closed on schedule. Nothing seemed improvised. Nothing seemed theatrical. There were no slogans on the walls. No posters warning them what would happen if they disobeyed. No speeches. That absence bothered her more than any threat could have. In the mornings, she watched the guards as they changed shifts. They spoke little, exchanging brief words that sounded practical rather than ideological. One would hand over a clipboard, another would nod. They stamped their feet against the cold-adjusted gloves and went back to their posts. No one seemed interested in being watched. She had been taught that enemies needed to be reminded of their power, that authority had to be performed or it dissolved. Here, power seemed uninterested in performance. Work details began soon after. She expected humiliation, expected meaningless labor designed to exhaust without purpose. Instead, tasks were assigned plainly, clear instructions, clear expectations. She noticed that prisoners who followed them were left alone. Those who struggled were shown how. An American soldier demonstrated how to stack firewood so it would not collapse. He did it once, slowly, then stepped back. No mocking, no impatience. Just a look that said, "Try it this way." It unsettled her. In Germany, discipline had been loud. Commands shouted until they echoed. Mistakes punished publicly to instruct the rest. Here, discipline was quiet, almost invisible, and somehow more effective. People moved because the system moved, not because fear chased them. She watched a man stumble one afternoon, his hands numb the wood slipping from his grip. She braced herself for what she had learned to expect. Instead, a guard picked up the fallen piece, handed it back, and waited. The man nodded and continued. No one laughed. At night, the barracks were warmer than she had prepared for. Not warm enough to forget the season, but warm enough that breath no longer fogged constantly in the dark. Wool blankets were issued without comment. When someone coughed too long, a medic appeared the next day, unhurried clipboard under his arm. She stood in line for a medical check and waited for indifference. She had seen enough of that before. Instead, the doctor looked at her hands, asked her to open and close them, tested the circulation with careful fingers. "You're cold," he said, as if stating a fact about the weather. He wrote something down and motioned for the next person. She was given thicker socks. That night, lying on her cot, she tried to reconcile what she was experiencing with what she knew to be true. America was her enemy. America was decadent, violent, careless with human life. America was supposed to be cruel, yet cruelty, when she had known it, had always been intentional. It announced itself. It made sure to be understood. This did not. The camp functioned whether they hated it or not, whether they believed in it or not. The guards did not demand gratitude. They did not demand submission beyond what was necessary to keep the system moving. That was the most disorienting part. She realized slowly that no one here seemed invested in convincing her of anything. There was no effort to persuade her that America was good. There was no effort to persuade her that Germany was evil. There was no effort at all. The days passed measured by routine rather than fear. Meals arrived on time. Work ended when it was meant to. Lights dimmed at night. Snow fell, melted slightly, then froze again, the cycle repeating with mechanical indifference. She began to understand that this place did not require her agreement to function. That thought lodged itself deep in her chest. Back home, everything had required belief, participation, constant affirmation. Here, belief was irrelevant. The system did not care what she thought about it. That she realized was strength of a kind she had never been taught to recognize. She watched the American soldiers closely, trying to find the hatred she had been warned about. She found tiredness. She found competence. She found men who did their jobs and went on doing them day after day without spectacle. They did not need to prove themselves superior. They already knew they were in control. The realization came with a quiet horror. Not because she felt threatened, but because it unraveled something fundamental. Power, as she had understood it, depended on fear, on constant reinforcement, on visible dominance. This power did not. She thought of Europe again, of the desperate effort to maintain order as everything else collapsed. The louder the commands grew, the more fragile the structure beneath them had become. She had mistaken volume for strength. Here, strength did not raise its voice. She began to see the camp not as a prison first, but as a reflection. A small, contained version of something larger, something that extended beyond the fences and into the world she had never seen. A society that trusted systems more than slogans, that trusted routine more than rage, that trusted abundance enough not to guard it with cruelty. The thought was dangerous. She knew that. Dangerous not because it threatened her safety, but because it threatened her certainty. If America was capable of this, of restraint of order without spectacle of discipline, without humiliation, then something she had believed without question was wrong. And if that was wrong, what else was? She lay awake one night listening to the familiar sound of the wind pressing against the walls, the wood answering with its quiet complaints. The fear was still there, but it had changed. It was no longer the fear of being harmed. It was the fear of being wrong. By the time she closed her eyes, one truth had settled inescapably into her thoughts, heavy and undeniable. The beliefs she had carried across the ocean were no longer holding, and she could feel them beginning to give way. The collapse did not come when she expected it. There was no single moment of terror, no sharp edge, no sound that marked the beginning. It arrived the way winter fatigue did, quietly after the body had already carried more than it could account for. It began in the infirmary. She had not thought of herself as sick. Cold, yes. Thin, certainly. Everyone was. But sickness implied failure, and she had learned long ago how to keep functioning without naming what hurt. Still, her name appeared on a list, and she was told to report after the morning work detail. The building was smaller than she imagined. Clean, smelled faintly of antiseptic and soap, nothing else. The windows were fogged, and heat radiated from a metal unit along the wall, steady and unremarkable. She sat on the edge of a cot and waited. The doctor did not hurry. He checked her pulse, her eyes, the inside of her mouth. His hands were warm, practiced. He asked questions she answered automatically, dates and places that felt increasingly unreal. He listened to her chest, nodded once, then reached for the blanket. She tensed. Instead of pulling it away, he drew it higher around her shoulders, tucking the edge in with the same absent care someone might use for a child who had fallen asleep in the wrong place. "You're burning through calories," he said, not unkindly. "That cold'll do it." He made a note on his chart. When a metal cup appeared in his hand, she assumed it was water. She reached for it out of habit, already preparing herself for disappointment. It was soup. Not thin, not stretched. Steam rose from the surface carrying the smell of vegetables and fat. Real fat. Her fingers curled around the cup and she felt the heat seep into her palms before she could stop it. For, after he said, "Drink it slow." Again with the word, slow. She nodded, unable to speak. When he moved on to the next patient, she sat alone, the cup warming her hands, the blanket heavy on her shoulders. The room was quiet except for the soft movements of the staff, the rustle of paper, the low murmur of voices that never rose. She took a sip. The taste was simple, nothing special. And that was what undid her. Her throat closed without warning. The cup shook, and she had to set it down quickly before she spilled it. Her breath hitched once then again, shallow and uneven. She pressed her lips together, trying to contain it, trying to force the feeling back into whatever place she had kept it buried. It did not obey. Tears came without drama sliding down her face in silence, warm against skin gone numb from holding too much too long. She bent forward slightly, shoulders rounding, careful not to draw attention, careful even now. She was not crying because she was afraid. She was crying because someone had noticed, because someone had seen the cold and responded without asking permission, because her body, fed and warmed and held in place by routine, had finally stopped bracing itself long enough to feel what it had been surviving. She covered her mouth with her hand as if that could contain the sound that wanted to escape. No sobs came. Just the steady release of pressure she had not realized was constant. Across the room, no one looked at her. That too mattered. When she finished the soup, she felt heavier, grounded in a way that startled her. Not full, she had long since forgotten what that felt like, but steadier. As if something inside her had been given permission to pause. The realization followed quickly, merciless in its clarity. She was healthier here. The thought was obscene. She rejected it immediately, then found it waiting for her when she tried to turn away. She slept better now. Her hands no longer shook when she worked. The hollow ache behind her eyes had softened. She could walk without feeling the edge of dizziness that had once been constant. And at the same time she knew that her family was not. She pictured her mother standing in a kitchen that no longer smelled of bread, measuring portions that grew smaller by the week. She imagined her father reading notices pinned to walls, each one worse than the last. She imagined the winter settling in across Germany not as a season, but as a sentence. She was eating meat. They were not. The guilt came fast, sharp enough to steal her breath. It curled in her chest, tightening until she pressed a fist there as if that could hold it in place. She had not chosen this. She had not earned it. And yet, it was happening. She was being kept alive with care. The camp did not celebrate this fact. No one made speeches about mercy. No one asked for thanks. The food arrived. The blankets stayed. The system continued. That was the hardest part to accept. There was no triumph in it. No demand for recognition. This was not kindness performed for an audience. It was simply done. In the days that followed, she noticed how often small interventions appeared without announcement. Extra rations for those who faltered. Gloves issued before hands cracked beyond use. A guard adjusting a stove when the barracks grew too cold, then leaving without comment. None of it was framed as generosity. It was framed as maintenance. She had been taught that power revealed itself through dominance, through spectacle, through fear carefully cultivated. Here, power revealed itself through capacity, through the ability to sustain life even when that life belonged to an enemy. That understanding broke something open inside her. One night back on her cot, she stared at the ceiling and let the thought finish forming no matter how much it hurt. If they could do this for her, they could do it for their own. And if they could do it for their own, then everything she had been told about American weakness was a lie built on distance and ignorance. She turned her face into the pillow and let herself cry again, quietly, thoroughly, without resistance. Not for herself alone, but for the absurdity of it all, for the cruelty that had been unnecessary. For the years wasted believing strength had to look a certain way, When the tears stopped, she felt emptied but intact. That was the strange thing. She had broken, and yet nothing had been taken from her. She lay there, breathing evenly, the sounds of the barracks settling around her, and understood with a clarity that left no room for denial. Whatever this place was doing to her, it was not destroying her. It was holding her together. She had collapsed, and she had been kept whole. She never forgot how she was treated. The thought returned to her years later without warning, the way certain memories did not summoned, not forced, but arriving whole, intact, as if they had been waiting patiently for the right moment to surface. The war ended without ceremony for her. No final confrontation. No dramatic release. One day the routines loosened. The guards spoke of schedules changing. Papers were signed. Names were called. The fences did not vanish overnight, but their meaning did. When she boarded the ship that would take her back across the Atlantic, she carried little with her. A small bag, worn clothes, a body stronger than it had been when she arrived, and something less visible, harder to explain. She carried memory. Germany received her quietly. There were no crowds, no celebrations, just a country exhausted beyond language. Cities reduced to outlines, faces sharpened by hunger and disbelief. Winter still came as it always had, but now it felt different. Less like an enemy, more like an accounting. She returned to a home that barely resembled the one she had left. Rooms colder, shelves emptier, people thinner. She learned quickly which questions not to ask, which stories could not yet be told. But time moved whether people were ready or not. Years passed. Then more. She married. She worked. She learned how to live in a country that had to rebuild not just its streets, but its understanding of itself. Children came. Then eventually grandchildren. It was to them that the story found its voice. Not all at once. Not in speeches. In fragments offered carefully, usually when no one expected them. While peeling potatoes, while mending a coat, while watching snow fall outside a window that no longer rattled. She spoke of America rarely and never with bitterness. She did not speak of weapons. She spoke of bread, of coffee served in glass cups that caught the light, of soup that arrived warm without anyone asking her name, of a handkerchief left on the ground and taken back without words, of doctors who adjusted blankets instead of removing them. The children listened puzzled at first. This was not how enemies were supposed to behave. This was not how war stories usually ended. But they were the enemy, one of them said once, unable to reconcile it. She nodded. Yes, she said. They were. That was the point. She did not frame it as forgiveness. Forgiveness suggested injury that demanded resolution. She framed it as fact. This is what happened. This is how I was treated. She watched their faces as the meaning settled in slowly, watched as the simple logic of it worked its way through assumptions they had inherited without realizing it. If this was true, then the war had not been as simple as they had been taught. If this was true, then victory had worn more than one face. She understood as she grew older that what stayed with her was not gratitude in the narrow sense. Gratitude faded softened by time and repetition. What remained was something steadier. Recognition. She recognized with increasing clarity that there were different kinds of triumph. The kind that reshaped borders, and the kind that reshaped memory. America had defeated Germany militarily. That was history. But what lingered, what followed her home across an ocean, was something else entirely. It was the knowledge that she had been allowed to remain human at a moment when everything around her had encouraged the opposite. That knowledge did not absolve anyone. It did not erase suffering. But it endured. In her final years, when movement became slower and winters felt longer again, she found herself returning to that first morning more often. The smell that had woken her, the weight of a metal tray, the simple instructions spoken without suspicion. Eat slow. She understood then how much that moment had mattered, not because of what it gave her physically, but because of what it demonstrated. That a nation at war could choose restraint, that power could operate without spectacle, that enemies did not have to be humiliated to be defeated. She never spoke these conclusions aloud. She did not need to. They were present in the way she lived, in how she treated others, in how she taught her children to measure strength not by volume, but by consistency. When she died, there was no mention of Fort Chaffee in the notices posted on the wall of the small church where she was remembered. There was no footnote acknowledging the place where something inside her had shifted permanently. But among those who stood quietly afterward exchanging stories in low voices, the memory persisted. A granddaughter spoke of the way she insisted on setting the table properly even when there was little to place upon it. A grandson remembered how she never wasted food, but never used scarcity as a weapon. Another recalled the way she spoke of Americans not with admiration exactly, but with a careful respect that suggested something earned rather than assumed. They did not all understand it then. But the story stayed. Years later, some of them would visit the United States. They would see the distances, the fields, the quiet order of small towns that had grown up around routines rather than slogans. And they would remember what they had been told, piecing together meaning from fragments left behind. They would understand at last why she had spoken the way she did. Not every victory announces itself. Some victories travel home inside the people who were once defeated. Some victories leave behind something more durable than fear. She never forgot how she was treated. And because she did not forget, neither did those who came after her. The war ended. The memory did not. It remained as a question passed quietly from one generation to the next, never asked aloud but always present, waiting for someone to notice it. We were capable of this. Are we still?